there was this video, and it's a shame actually because this is from an old debate that I always wanted to cover it because it's quite good for going through the trans arguments. We've been through Michael Knowles's arguments and his kind of like open, explicit science denial, which he just admits to straight up, and also the whole eradicate from public life memes. And we've done the Matt Walsh thing where he just dodged a question from the Vosh fan and like just pivots all the way back to what is a woman because it's all he has. So I don't really find either of them nearly as, I guess, impressive when it comes to the debate stuff anyway. Like they've both tried to copy the Ben Shapiro stick where they go to university, stand on a podium, have someone else control the microphone for them, and then just bully the fuck out of incompetent 21-year-old students. So whatever. But Ben Shapiro is a little bit better at what he does. He's the pioneer after all. So we should probably cover one of his arguments. And there's the video here where he actually rehashes one of his old debates, which is very cringe, but let's see. Let's go. Volume master. Fuck off. Come down. Please have normal volume, Ben. Please, go.
Well, folks, as you know, there's a clip of me
That's so loud. As you know.
once went viral, all about me asking a young woman why she couldn't be 60. She was arguing, of course, that a man could be a woman. So I said, well, you're 21. Why can't you be 60? Well, now people are actually doing this. They're actually claiming that they are trans age.
Wow.
I do wonder sometimes whether the left hears itself.
When he says people are doing this now, I feel like viral clips of weirdos who think they're a different age has been around for a long time, like a very long time. This is not new, as far as I know. And what typically happens is everyone makes fun of them or just leaves them alone. I don't think there's a left-wing movement for trans ageism. I think that's real. Okay.
So, over in Florida, a gay parade has now been canceled. Why? According to Local 10, officials in a Florida city have canceled the gay pride parade and restricted other pride events to people 21 years and older in anticipation of Governor Ron DeSantis signing a bill meant to keep children out of drag shows.
Wow.
The Pride Alliance of the Treasure Coast posted Wednesday on Facebook the decision to change this Saturday's Pride Fest events was made after multiple conversations with Port St. Lucie officials. So, why? Well, apparently, the DeSantis administration was cracking down on lewd displays before children. They basically said no assless chaps or displays of dildos and in front of the kids.
Okay.
And the gay pride parade, instead of being like, okay, we'll fly our rainbow flags and we will celebrate gay marriage, they're like, nope, we're going to pull the parade. Do you hear yourselves, guys? I mean, I'm fine with it. That's what you want to do. But it seems like you're kind of like, is that if the purpose of the gay pride parade is the assless chaps and the simulated sex act in front of kids, and so you have to cancel it to the extent that like a law that says you can't sexually indoctrinate kids affects the parade?
Well, I think the problem is that Republicans are so broad about what they mean by sexually indoctrinating kids, right? Like you know my stance on the kink at Pride stuff. I'm not in favor of people doing fucking like spanking in front of kids or doing like puppy play in front of kids. I'm not for that. I think that's a good thing to do for like a public Pride event, which for a kid might be their only exposure in an entire year to the LGBT community, right? That might be their only, which is a shame because some kids who are LGBT, that might be a really, really big moment for them. And that's kind of like a little bit muddied for them by people who want to just enact like BDSM shit that most BDSM communities would usually say you should keep behind like in a particular space away from kids. But like the problem is that Republicans don't want to stop there. Republicans see everything LGBT as sexualizing kids, right? They would see like a Freddie Mercury kind of expression of being gay, like that aesthetic as being sexualizing kids. They would say being trans in public might be sexualizing kids. They would say a drag story hour where a drag queen who is maybe more overdressed than the average person and reading a book to kids is sexualizing. So, I don't know. It makes sense that with these new bills that don't actually have precedent, these bills a lot of them are the first of their kind, which means a lot of it will just be down to what a judge or a jury decides is sexualized, which is really annoying. I would expect people to be very jumpy around that.
What does that say about your parade, really? I mean, meanwhile, other things that I like. The trans movement, obviously, is going to have some radical ramifications for a lot of other things in American life. One of those things, obviously, is going to be the question of age. So you'll recall that a few years back, a very, very famous exchange, me and a college student, in which this college student took the position that men can be women, women can be men. And I asked this college student her age. And she told me her age. She said she was 20 or something, 21. And I said, why aren't you 60?
Wow.
And this,
everyone
of course, went
clapped.
viral because I was saying, like,
I'm going to say, if you're almost 40 and you are like low key, not low key at all, humble bragging about a debate you had with a student as a media trained professional, you probably need to reevaluate your approach, your integrity. You probably need to ask yourself, how honest an actor am I being here? Fuck me.
you can't change your age and you can't change your sex. So what are you talking about here? Let me ask you this. Okay, I won't ask you how old. I will ask you how old you are, okay? Because you're young enough that it's probably not insulting to ask you. So
I'm 22, so I'm probably young and naive, right?
No. Why aren't you 60? Why aren't you 60?
Because it...
Whoa!
Why can't you identify as 60?
Get
What is the
fucked!
problem with you identifying as 60?
Bitch!
It's not the same as gender. You can't just...
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender. Well,
I never understood that last bit. Age is more important than gender. Like in what? Where? What context? If you're a man, if you're a straight man, and someone says there are two people and you have to fuck one of them, one of them is a man who is your age, and the other one is a 6-year-old girl. I don't know. I feel like the age is pretty important there. Fuck. What did he say?
identify. You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender.
Yeah, he said age is less important than gender. But why? Where? There are so many situations where age is more important than your gender, right? You have 2 CVs in front of you for an office job. One applicant is a 25-year-old woman, the other is an 8-year-old boy. Like what? You'd want to know that the age would be more important than the gender, right? If you have to know one fact about both applicants, you'd want to know the age, not the gender. Making someone stumble when they're talking means they're automatically wrong. Well, yeah, that's the and everyone clapped. That's the Ben Shapiro approach, though, isn't it? Like, it is. Like, the problem is, okay, the age thing. If someone who's born a male can become a woman, why can't someone who's 22 be 60? That's the question, right? And if you've fleshed out your view on trans stuff, it should be a reasonably easy question. The problem is, I think when some people advocate for trans rights, they maybe take a few different approaches that are, there are approaches to advocating for the validity of trans people, or like the existence of trans people, that sometimes appear contradictory, but they aren't necessarily. There's a few different approaches. So the thing is, let's draw it out, okay? So age, the thing with these concepts, age and gender, is that they are both referring to something. They're referring to a fact of the universe, okay? Is that a real thing, a fact of the universe? I feel like I say that a lot, but I don't know if it's actually a thing. Anyway, age is referring to how many times the Earth has gone around the sun since you were born, right? So it's measuring time. Time measurement. We call it a time measurement. And the reason, I've already made this way too fucking, okay, hang on. So age is referring to a measurement of time. Now, there is a little bit of leeway here, depending on how we talk about treating people for their age. Age can also map on I don't know, what would you call this, Art? This is like, I guess, like a physical reality that we're referring to here. I'm kind of winging this, okay? I think there's like two ways you can approach this. So we're talking about physical reality here. The gender parallel here would be, if you want to make the biological argument for trans people, which is the brain, is that your gender or your gender identity, we'll say, is also mapping on to something real. This would be the physical. So gender ID would be measuring to what biologists would call brain sex. Turns out it's a real concept. Fuck me, I can't type for shit. Okay, brain sex. Now, the idea that they're coming up with here is that based on some preliminary evidence, your brain, everyone's brain, is roughly sexed at before you're born or around the time that you're born. So it's the case that although it's not like a complete binary, there's not like a distinct female brain and distinct male brain. There are aspects and parts of the brain that will be a different size and a different density or quantity or whatever else, whatever measurement, if you're a man than if you're a woman. So there are parts of the brain that are bigger for men. There are parts of the brain that are smaller for men. There are parts of the brain that have different thickness for men and different thickness for women. There are different, like, I think, strengths of signals in certain areas that are different for men and women as well. And it turns out with trans people, if you're a trans woman, then those parts of the brain that vary between men and women might be more similar to a woman's than a man's. That seems to be roughly the case. And what's even more interesting, actually, is that for some parts of the brain, I don't know if it's gray matter or something to do with like different. No, it's to do with there are different signal strengths in certain parts of the brain that trans men and women have their own kind of like rough area where they gather around that's different from both cis women and cis men. That trans people have like parts of their brain that are actually just like their own distinct level of like signal strength or something like that. So it's very preliminary science. There's not really like, we still don't diagnose people in this way. When someone is trans, you don't look at their brain. You just ask them questions and you have sessions with them and you try to figure out whether or not this thing about them is something that is like immutable or not, right? Anyway, so this again would be the physical argument. And I think if you want to convince someone who's quite materialist and quite, I guess just like right-wingers, I suppose, then you'd probably want to use this argument because I feel like it's the easiest one to kind of show the reality of trans people because it counters the essential, like the most common right-wing argument about trans people, which is that it's not real. They don't think it's an immutable characteristic. That's why I think this one is the more valuable one. Yeah, for logic bros, yeah? Now, the other argument, I don't think these are mutually exclusive, is there's a social one as well. There's a social aspect to both of these things, right? So when we talk about age, we do actually do a little bit of transageism. And we've been doing it for decades, maybe hundreds of years. Because we have a concept that is recognized in medicine to some degree as mental age. We have this. We have people who can be 40 years old and we treat them like they're 8 or 6, or we have a mental age of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. And that's a social, and even though that is mapping on something physical, it's something that we express in a social way. We adapt our social behavior to like functionally in many, many important ways. We treat them like a younger person, which is kind of leaning more into like a social expression. So really, a better analogy here for gender identity rather than age might be like maturity. Because again, when it comes to something like sex, This is where the graph gets really confused. Okay, shit. Sex usually refers to chromosomes or genitals or hormones, but it also actually does refer a little bit to this. Sorry, the big one. Gametes. We love gametes. That's like the main one, right? We're all producers of the large or small gamete. And when people have discrepancies, like they might have a chromosomal type that is different from how their body is expressing. So someone might have Swyer syndrome, where their body is basically doing and appearing as a man's, sorry, as a woman's, but they have XY chromosomes. We have examples like that. We have ambiguous genitalia. We have hormone levels that, I mean, hormone levels can change. You can physically change hormone levels with HRT and shit. And we have some people who are producing neither gamete, right? We have that as well. So there comes times where there is a bit of crisscrossing that can happen. And in that case, we have to make a judgment over whether or not this person is going to be socially recognized as a woman or a man. And we do this with intersex cases all the time. And a lot of these decisions are fairly arbitrary. Sometimes the medical consensus on which decisions you make change over time. There are some intersex conditions that we used to socialize them as women on the basis of them having like gametes, of them having ovaries producing egg gametes. But we have now decided to flip that and actually identify them as males because they identify as males. That's what happens to people with congenital adrenal hyperplasia. So, yeah, there are some decisions that you make here, but the way you think about this is that gender identity is mapping on to it's referring to something real, regardless of which of these you choose. It's reflecting something real. Or if you want to go into the other way, if you don't like the brain sex argument, what you can also do is you can go into the more social thing, which is, this is where, and I don't think this is completely contradictory either. Let's do another arrow here. Okay, let's get fucking wild. Shit. We can go here where we talk about, what would you do this? Gender expression. Now, this is the more social performance side of gender, which I don't think is completely disconnected from the brain sex thing. But this is how we diagnose to some degree, or how we socially decide whether someone is a trans woman or a cis woman or whatever. Like, and that's because of gender expression. Because, like we have with maybe mental age, or I guess the more social one would be like maturity. Actually, hang on. Let's be really let's be really wacky here, okay? Because here I would say there's some overlap, social, physical, because it's kind of both. I don't necessarily agree with this last one, but we'll make it anyway. And then you can have another one here, which is where we talk about maturity, which is all social. Yeah. And the analog to that would be gender expression, which is things like performance, norms, customs, etc. And I don't think these two are like mutually exclusive. I think it's very possible to understand that trans people probably are neurologically wired a little bit differently from cis people. At least that's what the evidence suggests now. But again, we don't just recognize gender in a biological way. We also recognize gender as a way that is expressed through social norms and traditions, right? Which is why trans women don't need to change their voices, but they typically do, because that's the social language that they would speak to make it easier for people to recognize them as women. That's why they dress differently. That's why they wear makeup. That's why they do all the other like performative things that are typically associated with the gender expression of a woman. Same with trans men. And these two can overlap, but the reason they do that, the reason they have the mental process that pushes them to do that, that makes them want to do that, is very likely from something that's happening in their brain. So it's not like it's mutually exclusive. And I think with the gender expression thing, people who are more into the trans medical position like to throw that out. But actually, one person who does actually recognize the influence of gender expression in determining someone's gender, maybe even more so than any of these things, is Ben Shapiro. Because Ben Shapiro, despite not believing in trans people, has occasionally, in his world, misgendered people because they had performed the social role of women so effectively that his default was to call her a she, right? Fuentes has done this as well. I feel like so many conservative pundits have had these moments where Stephen Crowder did it, where they Crowder did it just recently with Dylan Mulvaney. Yeah, people will accidentally call trans women she all the time, and they actually have to make a conscious effort to use he, him pronouns on trans women. They do that all the time. Can you imagine someone like if you're pointing out Buck Angel in a crowd and you have to use a pronoun to do that, you're going to use he. So the way I always see trans identity and gender is like based on what we know now, it's really both of these. Your gender is really mapping onto both of these when it comes to trans people. And someone in chat just said, okay, let's say that the evidence actually on the brain sex stuff turns out to be completely false. Let's say the science disproves it. What happens to trans acceptance? Well, I would say that this part of it, if the brain sex goes away and it's still very clear that there are 0.5% or 1% of people in society who have this innate drive to a certain gender identity, that no amount of therapy or social conditioning or stigma is getting rid of it, that it's just an immutable trait, well, then that would be something that's called something that is maybe immaterial, like we can't see it in the brain, but it's nonetheless objective. It's still an objective fact because it's presenting itself through the experience of the people who are trans. Because Ben Shapiro didn't need to believe in brain sex to call a trans woman she. Neither did Fuentes, neither did Crowder. So the question for Ben Shapiro is, if you are 22, why are you not 60? Well, that's because age is mapping onto something. Age is referring to a physical fact, i.e. the amount of times you have gone around the world, the amount of times the earth has circled the sun since you were born. When we talk about gender, we're not just talking about chromosomes, genitals, hormones, and gametes. We're also talking about a fact of the human brain or the human psyche that is real. And in society, if there ever were someone who could be born, who could be 20 years old or 30 years old, but have a 60-year-old's brain, well, society would have to treat them differently as well. And we do. People with clinically recognized like lower mental ages than what their physical age is, we treat them differently as well. The world would actually be a pretty weird, like there'd be a lot of problems if someone had a mental age of 4, but they were 30 years old and we treated them like a 30-year-old. That could be like abusive. It would be harmful if you did that. So I guess that's your answer. And if you want to just discount, if you don't like that, again, I maybe don't think this is the best argument, but I think it's good enough. Is if we don't like the brain sex thing, or if let's say the brain sex thing wasn't real, but everything else about trans people was, well, you could still say, well, a better analogy for age to talking about trans people would be trans people are not delusional about any of these things. They know they know what gametes they're producing. They know what their hormones are like. They know what their genitals are. They know what their chromosome, or they have probably a good opinion on what it is. They can make a good guess. In the same way that we're not delusional when we talk about someone having a low mental age, we're not delusional about how many times the Earth has circled the sun since they were born. It's just that we're talking about something different. So a better analogy for age, for trans ageism, would be maturity. Like something that we can acknowledge. We can acknowledge that someone has maybe a lower or higher maturity than their age without ignoring their actual age. In the same way, we can acknowledge the reality of someone's gender identity being different from what they were assigned at birth, but also not ignoring the sexual characteristics that they were born with. So, does that answer everyone's question? You can't have sex with a brain. Okay, well, Lorna Box destroyed. So I made this argument to a 5-year-old and they cried. Oh, got him. Based. Okay. Does this video go on? Let's see what happens. How do you try to convince a person that an internal experience of gender is a thing that exists? Imagine a conservative saying, there's no internal experience, just sex characteristics. Okay, well then why the fuck are trans people a thing? Why is it the case that there are people who will literally kill themselves because they feel like their internal experience is not mapping on accurately to what their body is doing? And why is that only very specific to trans people? Why is it that therapy can actually help people manage eating disorders, things like that, but it can't help them manage trans people, like being trans? It seems to be that the best approach for trans people is bringing their body more in line to how they perceive themselves. They'd probably just respond mental illness. Okay, here's the ultimate thing, right? If being trans is a mental illness, if being trans is a fucking sickness, well, okay, then that's even more reason to give them HRT surgery because that's the way that's the treatment right now that best and most effectively alleviates the symptoms. If a conservative is so adamant that being trans is a mental illness, well, it just happens to be that mental illness is best alleviated by hormones and surgery. Conversion therapy doesn't work. There's no research that shows any positive results from trying to convince a trans person that they're not trans. And it's all that people say, oh, well, what about anorexia, bulimia? Well, if you try to bring an anorexic person's body in line with what their mind is saying, then they'll die. They'll become so skinny and so malnourished that they'll die. However, you bring a trans person in line with their gender, with their identity, well, then they're happier. They live a more fulfilled life generally. Their suicidal ideation goes away. Yeah.
Remember the Holodomor?
Nilv, thanks for the tier 1 sub. I really appreciate that. Thanks for reminding everyone that those bars need pushed. Let's go, chat. Let's go.
Well, now I guess we've hit the end of parity because now we have 60-year-old men identifying as 6-year-old girls. This is a clip that was going viral on the Twitters of a 60-year-old man in Great Britain.
How do you explain to a mum's neck Karen that trans girls using their preferred bathroom and changing room at school when they have a penis is okay?
You laugh in the face of your last interlocutor on this issue.
Yeah, okay, sure. I'm a man, okay? I go into the men's toilets. If I see a bunch of dicks in the bathroom...
You laughed in the face of your last interlocutor
that are not my
issue.
own. I'm doing it wrong. I don't know. You're not really supposed to see the genitalia of the other people in the bathroom with you. Wow, so cool. Nil, thanks for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs. Really appreciate that. And Maruzzi with the 5 gifted tier 1 subs. Damn, back to back. That's so based. Based? So high level based. Wow, thank you so much. Wow. Anyway, chat, we have a hype train in 4 minutes. Let's go.
And claiming that he is, in fact, a 6-year-old girl. Now, it's hilarious.
Why don't dudes put urinals in the stalls? Because you might want to sit down and shit, Maruzzi.
About this, and the reason why I put it in things I like rather than things I hate is I think it does quite well expose the trans agenda. If this were a man claiming that he is in day 365 of girlhood, he would be getting all sorts of ad deals from Maybelline and Tampax and Bud Light.
Why not? Okay, if you want to pee standing in a cubicle because you're like socially anxious or whatever the fuck, you can still pee standing into a toilet bowl. I have a toilet in my bathroom, not a urinal, and I pee standing up. God, chat's gone a weird place.
But since he claims that he's a 60-year-old man who's a 6-year-old girl, it's the age that really is upsetting people. It's the age that's troubling.
Yeah, it's all about space. That's why if you ever go to a gig, and just after the band finishes, there's always a huge queue outside the women's toilets, and the man's toilet is just going because they can fit more people into the space, even though they're given the same amount of space.
Not the fact that this is a dude claiming that he is a female.
Today is my first day of having my living room as my playroom. And my Kodo is here with me, but I didn't have any friends over for the play date because it's COVID time.
Okay.
But I'm having fun with Makoto, my cat, and with Franny. She's my baby. Anyways, I just wanted you to see I made a tutu with my sewing machine.
Oh no.
And it's for pretending to be a little fairy.
Oh no. Oh no. But here's the thing. Why not? Question to the left. Why not? Why can't this 60-year-old man be a 6-year-old girl?
I don't know. Why don't you
Say
ask
he's a
someone
man
who's
who
not
can
a fucking student, Ben Shapiro? Why?
Be a girl. Again, day 365 of girlhood means that you're getting calls from the president of the United States. So when is the prime minister of Britain? Not Rishi Sunak, who actually has his head screwed on straight on this. Yeah, maybe some of the former prime ministers. Well, why don't they call up this guy and congratulate him on becoming a 6-year-old girl? I mean, the good news is that according to the left, this means that he is basically immortal because he can just keep identifying as a younger and younger person. He'll never die. So that's very exciting.
I don't get it though. How many people are backing the fairy? How many even leftists who don't like the transmedicalist or the brain sex or whatever the fuck else you call it? Even the fucking xenogender types. I don't see them ever defending the idea that the person is like authentically 6 years old, right? I don't think I've ever seen the trans ageism thing, even on Twitter. Do people back that? Do people like fucking Doe and shit? Do they back the trans ageism thing? Would they say that age is violence? Maybe. Go to Polly's Discord and I don't think Polly would back the trans ageism thing. I actually thought wasn't Polly's scandal that she was actually a little bit more gatekeepy than most of the far left people? Like that's what the Finster thing was about. Am I wrong? Am I wrong? Am I wrong? I don't know.
None of this ideology makes sense because it is all pagan crap and it has nothing to do with reality. Okay, time for some things that I hate. Alrighty, so there is a human named Jules Hoffman. Jules Hoffman is a woman, but Jules Hoffman says that
that's the thing, the pagan crap. Like he thinks being trans is like choosing a religion. It's a choice. It's all a choice, or mental illness, or whatever the fuck. I don't know. Christianity is globalist and a branch of Judaism. God, you are a fucking strange person. Oh God. What? Well, that was an amazing Ben Shapiro video.